Talk us through the potential ramifications here.
Well, they could be significant for a number of agencies, Katie, including financial regulators like the Securities and Exchange Commission and climate and environmental regulators like the EPA. This is a doctrine that was established all the way back in 1984, which essentially gave the power of agencies like this the ability to interpret laws that were vague, which frankly, a lot of the legislation that actually comes out of Congress can indeed be vague. And they would use their own in-house experts to interpret that law and apply it.
These expert and administrative judges are policymakers and agency enforcers. They are not elected. They rule over their agency. The problem is that they can impose fines, which then support their agency. They can impose restrictions on business operations without constitutional authority, such as the SEC, who regulate by enforcement. This practice coerces business to pay a fine, as opposed to taking on the agency and unlimited government resources. Yes, you can appeal to real court of justice, but that is also time and expense.
Accordingly, in the court now overturning this today essentially takes that power away from the regulators, which means much more of this is going to have to be litigated in court and ultimately decided by the court rather than the agencies themselves. So think about things that the EPA has put out, for example, including auto emissions standards, for example, that could potentially be challenged. The way that the Securities and Exchange Commission actually interprets securities law, which of course is almost 100 years old at this point and has to be applicable to new developments in the financial system. It really limits the ability of regulators to do their own interpretations. And of course, this is the second day in a row we have seen a blow to regulators. The court also ruled yesterday against the SEC's in-house judges, which will limit not only the SEC, but other agencies and how they try, say, fraud cases internally. Now that all has to go to a jury. So once again, we're seeing the Supreme Court with a conservative majority ruling against regulators. And of course, the term is not yet over. We get more opinions on Monday, Katie.
Yes, we do. And before we get there, I do want to ask, I mean, we talked a bit about the EPA, of course, the implications there. What about Wall Street, though? You mentioned the SEC, for example. What could this mean?
Well, it could change the way in which the SEC is able to interpret its own authority. Remember, existing securities law has been on the books since the mid-1900s, and they apply it to say things like digital assets.
Courts has ruled that digital currency in and of itself are not securities, but yet SEC, which is operating outside of congressional mandate, continue enforcement without providing guidance.
Saying that those laws don't need to change or be rewritten. It could limit the ability to do that unless Congress writes more clear laws that can be interpreted directly. It will now be up to the court's discretion to read how those vague laws are. This also could apply to, say, the Federal Trade Commission, the efforts that are underway to ban non-competes, for example. This could potentially throw that into question. Really, at the end of the day, this takes a lot of discretionary power away from the regulators, puts it back into the hands of courts of law, including, of course, the Supreme Court that ultimately had to come down with this decision today, Katie.
Yeah.